All right, it seems like the offensive changes just keep happening down at BYU. Brandon Doman relieved of his offensive coordinator duties after just a couple of years. Now more changes, Greg.
It was going to be a process with Coach and I, the new offensive coordinator, working along with Bronco Mendenhall in hiring a new staff. And we've gotten to the point now where, in addition to Coach Doman being relieved of his OC duties, Coach Mendenhall Monday let go his running backs coach, Joe Dupaix, and wide receivers coach, Ben Cahoon. Of course, before that, you already had tight ends coach Lance Reynolds retiring, and the previous O-line coach, Mark Weber, has already found other work at Utah State. So now it is, truly we're ready for an overhaul, if you will, of the offensive coaching staff. The one coach in that mix whose status has really not been finally determined is that of Coach Doman. Now, he's been relieved of his OC duties, right, but he was, of course, also the quarterbacks coach. And what I'm told, there remains a possibility he could remain on staff. Presumably, it would be in that role as quarterbacks coach, but that's a little further down the line, and we're not really sure yet if that's going to truly happen. But from the room that Robert and I left in 2010 to even the room that finished 2012, that offensive staff room looks today vastly different than it used to, and clearly that's going to be the prerogative of any new offensive coordinator, right, is to kind of build his own staff, and that he's clearly in the process of doing.
Well, is it one of those things where if you're going to have an overhaul on the offense, you've got to let go of some of the the guys that were there before?
Well, to an extent, yes, especially if you're going for a culture change. I would point to wide receiver in particular. You could look at some metrics, you could look at some data, right, and say that under Coach Cahoon's tutelage, that was a position group that really improved its performance. If the major measurement is can you catch the ball and how well are you catching it?
The ball.
Yeah, would seem to be kind of key to that to that position group, and they've certainly gotten better at that as a group over the last couple of years. Well, and certainly you have to credit Cody Hoffman as an individual for earning a lot of his numbers. I mean, he's clearly an impressive player, but as a group, I think they've gotten better. And so, again, you could point to certain measurements and say, well, that's a coach or that's a group that clearly showed dramatic improvement. How do you make that change? But again, you're talking about prerogative, and if it is truly a culture change, he may feel that that he needs to bring in a different voice for that particular group. But I know that his efforts were pretty well received.
Yeah, and what Greg was talking about when you think about performance on the field, I mean, you understand guys want their guys that they're comfortable with, but just based off of performance alone, I think that's what makes these two firings somewhat puzzling, just because of the performance of the wide receivers, especially with Coach Cahoon. We've seen over the 2 years that he's been here a significant increase in production. We saw what Cody Hoffman did last year. And then with Coach Dupaix, anytime he's a position coach, but he's also the recruiting coordinator. When you let go of the recruiting coordinator, that is a major, major move, because now somebody's got to sort of pick up the pieces of the recruiting, and we're inside a month of signing day. So that's a big change to make with less than a month before guys are supposed to be signing on the dotted line.
We have to, I think, acknowledge that Bronco remains the main draw, when it comes to recruiting. I mean, he's ultimately going to be, I think, the coach these players signed to play for. And at BYU, much of, if not most of the work for this, current class was done long ago. I mean, the hay's in the barn that way. So I think it's one school where you could make a change like this close to signing day and not see a great deal of change or effect. Certainly moving forward, whoever gets brought in, and maybe somebody already, in fact, I would think it'd be somebody already on staff that can kind of just assume that role. But BYU is a unique school in terms of how far ahead they do actually end up recruiting. But it is certainly one of those roles that, that Joe owned.
Well, Shep, you're dealing with two guys that had a lot of local ties to BYU. Joe Dupaix, the Dupaix family, obviously Skyline High School, huge ties to the community, and then obviously Ben Cahoon, hugely successful as a wide receiver at BYU. To lose two guys that really homegrown from BYU or with very close ties, it's an interesting move.
It is an interesting move, and we all know what Coach Cahoon did as a player at BYU, and then now as, if not the best, one of the best wide receivers in Canadian Football League history. So he has the pedigree. He also has the background at BYU, which does make this I guess probably the word to look at is maybe awkward. It's a little more awkward because he does have the past with BYU. But at the end of the day, and you can agree or disagree with certain hirings or firings along the way. But one thing that everybody realized as the season was going on was that there needed to be a change in the offense in general. Now they've made that change, and at the end of the day, if these changes result in a better product on the football field, then they made the right decision. And that's really what it all boils down to. If results end up in a positive way for the BYU offense, then the right moves were made, because at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. You have to get the results, and the past 2 years they just hadn't.
Yeah, the end will, I think, justify the means in this case. If they get what they desired, if Robert and I is able to, through all of these changes, comprise and create a group that brings about the desired on-field results, then I think you look back and say, okay, I can see why certain changes were made. But there's a lot of pressure now on Coach Mendenhall and Coach and I both to really turn this thing in the direction they need it to go. We saw how close they were with a dominant defense and a mediocre to subpar offense. If they can match another dominant defense, which it should be, with a typical Anai offense from those 2005 to 2009 years, then BYU is going to be where it wants to be. But yeah, with as many changes as were made, you just I think Cougar fans all hope that they were exactly the right ones.
And coming into one of the toughest seasons in BYU history, it's going to be an incredibly
it's all on the line. It's on the line for everybody right now, because the schedule's there, the personnel appears to be there, the changes will have been made to get them there. So I don't think it's a stretch to say the most intriguing BYU football season we may have ever seen.
And it's still crazy that Max Hall, still don't know what's going to happen with him and Brandon Doman.
I do know that Max Hall has interviewed for positions on that staff. Of course, he was a student assistant this past year, and that BYU has talked to others with connections to the staff who've been former graduate assistants, for example, and Paul Peterson and Steve Clark. There was always kind of maybe a subtext involving Aaron Roderick, a former BYU receiver, has been at Utah for a long time. And there was some sense that if BYU were to make a change, might it be to bring A-Rod on board, but that doesn't appear to be the case now. He's situated at Utah, and apparently is intent on at least staying there through his contract, which I think has another year.
See, the Max Hall possible hiring, I think, is the one that's most intriguing to me right now. We had James Lark on Cougar Sports Saturday this past weekend, and he was singing Max Hall's praises and just how much he helped with his development. And it wasn't just James. All season long, when we would talk with any of the quarterbacks at practice, if you asked them about Max Hall, it was all very high praise for what he brought to the quarterback coach, even though that's not what he was. Essentially, that's what he did. Everybody talked about him as a guy that they really felt had a good head on his shoulders and was somebody that could really help them out. So I think that will be very interesting to see if he's the one that ultimately ends up with that quarterback coaching position.
And what Coach Doman does, of course, remains kind of a linchpin to all this as well. What will his decision be, and how much will be up to him in the end. So yeah,
it'll be fun to watch. Thanks, guys.